Hello there, this is Ava Jarvis, and I created a Leaving Earth calculations worksheet that is very simple, but I think captures more of the complexity of doing things with, say, ion thrusters and rendezvous ships carrying payloads that are composed of multiple rockets and components, and maybe even astronauts, space stations with supplies, and so on and so forth. So I thought that I would put together a spreadsheet, and it's pretty simple. There's not much that's automated about it, mostly because some of the calculations are somewhat complicated, I find. This sheet is meant to simplify some of that bookkeeping and basically be somewhere where you can write out your calculations and use some of the powers of the spreadsheet to help you calculate some of this stuff. So now let's start off with describing the columns. So I should probably just make a duplicate of the base sheet. Let's talk about, say, putting a probe with a Soyuz rocket into orbit around Venus and see what we need to do there. So first things first, the maneuver/payload description serves two purposes. First, for breaking down what a payload consists of. So for instance, in this case, it would be the probe, ion thrusters, Soyuz rocket, and that would be the payload. It's not a maneuver, and maneuvers would be as they are indicated in the book. For the Venus orbit rendezvous ship I described, we would have probe, rocket, ion thrusters. Okay, so that's the components that we're seeing that we need. Perhaps it should be ion thrusters times 10, say. That's going to be really expensive, like prohibitively so, but I just want to demonstrate this worksheet. Let's actually complete these component calculations for the payload before we go on. So right now, starting from the first component, there's no previous payload. So what we have now is we have the component mass, which in this case for the probe is 1, and that fills in the payload for the next row. So the component cost is $2. So I added a component cost column because keeping track of where the rockets and the probes and the ion thrusters and the astronauts and supplies add up is a little daunting sometimes. So the Soyuz rocket itself, without actually doing anything, weighs 9 mass, and its cost is $8. Okay, so now we've come to the ion thrusters. Their mass altogether is 10. Their cost is $100. 10 times 10. So now we've got our payload of 20, and now we can actually start doing the more normal calculations. So we're working backwards. So inner transfer to Venus orbit is, as usual, 3. But note that we've got a time column now. The time column is necessary for putting into your mind how much thrust the ion thrusters are going to provide you during that time. We've got the inner transfer to Venus orbit, and let's say we wanted to do this in 2 years, so 2 time. Payload is still 20. Rocket, in this case, we're going to put in parentheses because we aren't adding a rocket. They're the ion rockets, ion thrusters. The maximum payload column is something I added just to sort of keep in mind what's going on with the ion stuff. So in this case, because we're going for 2 years, according to the payload table on the back of the little card for your space program agency, if we're going for 2 years at a difficulty of 3, the maximum payload is 2 1/3. 10 ion rockets times 2 1/3, so 23.3. So the max payload and the payload match up more or less. There's no component mass, so we'll just put that as 0, and no component cost. Now, Earth orbit to inner transfer. 3, and we're taking 2 times, so we're again doing the same thing with the ion stuff. So let's keep going. Suborbital to Earth orbit. That's a difficulty of 5. Now, we can't use ion thrusters because we don't have any ability to add time tokens here. So our payload is 20. According to the table on the front of the Space Agency card, we need a Saturn rocket to carry that payload. The Saturn rocket carries 20, and the mass of the Saturn rocket is also 20. The component cost of Saturn rocket is $15. So okay, and now we've got the launch to suborbital, which is a 3. No time tokens, and we need to lift off with a payload of 40, which means we're using another Saturn rocket, and it's 46 1/3. Well, 46 2/3, sorry. Again, our max payload and our payload match up. We don't record the component mass because it doesn't matter for the Saturn rocket that pushes you off the ground first. And now we have our component cost for it, which is $15. Now I like to make little notes on the side like total cost and funding years. So the total cost is the sum of that to that, and funding years equals this divided by we get $25 a year, right? So yeah, 5.6 funding years. So this tells you that you need to plan this rendezvous really far ahead, and actually it's pretty ludicrous to say that, we're going to do this all in 4 years, because that requires a lot of ion thrusters to deal with. So this is a very helpful sheet to see where you are at, where you're going with your costs, and how long it will take to actually accumulate all the things that you need to do this stuff, which is necessary when you have difficult items like a man on Venus, for instance, which is worth 32, which basically means that if you don't pick that up, you're not going to win the game. So this is necessary, and I find it very helpful, and I hope you find it helpful too.